Hello, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a yoga teacher, ordained minister, amongst other things. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about why a dark night of the soul is so painful. Before I get into that, I do want to thank all of you who help support these talks on Patreon by making a monthly contribution. Some of you have been making one-time contributions on PayPal, Venmo. I appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you who like, subscribe, comment, and share the videos, as all of those things help spread the teaching. My intention with these talks is to help share things that I've learned and that I have learned through helping others walking this path, so to speak, for lack of a better way of putting it. So my intention is just to be helpful. All right, so why is a dark night of the soul so painful? I'm talking about the dark night. I've heard different teachers talk about it in different ways. So some people will talk about, like Eckhart has talked about, a dark night as a sort of pre-awakening experience. All of these terms and words are, none of them are set in stone. There are no super clear definitions anywhere. So these are things that teachers use intuitively. They use to point toward certain things. Don't get too caught up in terminology. But I've heard Eckhart refer to his pre-awakening experience as a dark night of the soul. Okay, I can understand why he would say that, and it does make sense. But I think traditionally that term was used to describe someone who had experienced a deep sense of connection with the divine or with spirit, with the true self. Really, again, these terms are not that important to me. People who I think haven't experienced what these terms are pointing to are the ones that fight over them, generally speaking. I don't think the terms are that important. What's important is what they are pointing us to. So, the way I'm using this term, dark night of the soul, is to describe losing that sense of peace and joy that we attain after awakening, okay? So why is a dark night so painful? What is going on here? If we woke up spiritually, aren't we supposed to be free of pain and enlightened and all this wonderful stuff? Well, yes and no, as we'll talk about today. So my own personal experience and the experience of many people I've spoke with, again, we can read stories and books about people who have these amazing, fantastical experiences. I don't really know one way or the other. I know the people I've spoken to, the teachers I've worked with personally, and generally, for most people, the story is not so fantastical. It's not so outsized from our normal everyday experience. And perhaps this is how it is. We read about things, people that have extraordinary experiences, right? We often are not reading about people who have more ordinary experiences. So as strange as it might sound, maybe there's such a thing as an ordinary awakening as opposed to an extraordinary awakening. This isn't a value judgment. So I'm not saying the ordinary awakening is less important or less impressive. It just might be not as interesting to read about or see a movie about. Okay, so having got that out of the way, generally we will wake up and we experience this deep sense of connection, love, peace, joy, bliss that we perhaps only experienced as a child. That's my own personal experience. I remember feeling that way as a child. I didn't really know any different. And as I got older, that feeling, I guess, went away more and more. And it was replaced more and more by a sense of suffering. Is this how it is for everybody? I don't know. I really don't. But children certainly seem to bounce back from situations. They often seem to glow with a certain kind of brightness and innocence. Jesus talked about the importance of innocence to enter the kingdom of heaven. So my intuitive sense is that probably most children, maybe not all of them, but most children are more in touch with spirit than the adults that are around them. So when we wake up, it can feel like the second birth or a return to that childlike innocence, but with all the things that come with being an adult, all the good things. So in a sense, it's the best of both worlds. It's the unification of the yin and the yang, the innocent and the wise. So we have this experience, and isn't that the end of the road? Aren't we done? Aren't we enlightened? Well, maybe, but it doesn't mean that we can't suffer. And a dark night is where, for whatever reason, we may know the reason, we might not, we lose that sense of connection. And in my experience, the suffering is great. It may be the greatest suffering that we know. Now, this seems like a paradox because I have spoken about in the past, and many teachers speak about awakening and enlightenment as the end of suffering. And in a sense, yes, this is, in a sense, what it is. It is us experiencing a lasting sense of connection to our true nature. And that tends to allow us to experience things like pain, discomfort, the ups and downs of life without bringing in suffering. But in a sense, suffering can come in at any time because confusion can come in at any time. So when it does, if and when it does, and I suspect it does much more than people might let on that it does. When it comes, losing that connection is so painful. And there's a few reasons why I think this is so, and I wanted to share these with you today. This is the main gist of the talk. One is it's really painful when you know better. So if you are trying to diet, lose weight, or exercise, or make a change, and you know what you need to do, but somehow you find yourself eating the ice cream, and you told yourself you wouldn't, but there you are, you're eating the ice cream. So you know better. And before, maybe you didn't know. You didn't know what you needed to do to lose weight. So eating the ice cream, you just ate it unconsciously, and there was no suffering, there's no pain there. You didn't really make the connection. But once you know better, maybe you've even lost weight not eating ice cream. And then all of a sudden you find yourself unable to resist the ice cream. Well, it's more painful because you know better. So the suffering is greater. The other aspect of this is before you really taste that peace, joy, and bliss of the awakened state, you really don't have much to compare to. And what I mean by this is, again, my experience is that as a child, I experienced much more of that sort of awakened blissful state. I don't know if it's that way for everybody, but I suspect it is for many. Again, as children, we're very innocent, and we don't have our heads and hearts filled with a lot of garbage yet. So we lose that gradually as we are educated, as the humans and adults around us try and teach us what they think is right and wrong, and they teach us, how we're good or bad little boys and girls. They try and tell us, what to believe about ourselves, and we're innocent, so we believe them. So that tends to be a gradual shift. So I think the pain, the suffering comes in very slowly. I think it tends to come to a climax probably around the teens. I think this is why so many teens seem miserable, because I think that they are maybe for the first time really experiencing the full brunt of that sort of human separation. Now, of course, I'm talking in huge generalizations here. So there could be teenagers who don't experience that separation at all. I also suspect there are children, young children, who never feel that sense of connection. Okay, so I'm painting in very broad strokes here, so this may not align with your experience, and that's okay. I'm not saying this is absolute truth or anything like that. So we are gradually losing this connection with spirit, with our true nature. And a lot of this, again, in my experience, is due to quote-unquote education, quote-unquote being civilized, people telling you what you should and shouldn't do. And you're not listening to spirit. You're not trusting spirit. You don't have faith in spirit. And so you lose this connection. It's sort of like if you're ignoring somebody, they might stop speaking. I don't think spirit ever completely stops communicating with you, but I think you can lose the ability to hear spirit. Not completely, but you can begin to sort of, you're just not used to listening for it. You don't know what to listen for anymore, right? So as a teenager, we might be miserable, we might be suffering, but we often don't even know that's what's happening. And if we are aware we're suffering, we probably ascribe it to things like, well, I want to get out of the house, I hate my parents, or I hate school, or I just want to be free and do my own thing, whatever it might be. We're probably placing the blame not really where the cause actually is. So it's a gradual thing, and we're probably not aware. May not even know we're suffering, right? A lot of teenagers, I think, if you ask them, are you happy, or, they might answer yes, and yet they look absolutely miserable. So when we wake up, we have this rebirth, spiritual rebirth, and we experience this peace and joy, and we know we're home. We know where we need to be. And then, for whatever reason, we lose contact. It might feel very sudden. That contrast is very stark, unlike the sort of gradual thing that happens as we grow up. And I think that is part of what makes it so intense. Having known this peace and joy as an adult, and then having it taken away from us suddenly, can really be a shock. And there's a stark contrast there. And this is actually one of the reasons why I really like having people come on retreat and do those experiences with me. A lot of people experience either an awakening, or they experience a lightening of the egoic burden. And that gives them some contrast, because otherwise we just sort of go through life And we seek out pleasure, but pleasure is different than joy, peace, bliss. Pleasure is very, very fleeting. It basically evaporates the minute that we aren't somehow feeding the mind or the body with some kind of candy. So entertainment or chocolate cake or a strong cup of coffee or a really sugary dessert, you know, a really salty, fatty meal, something like that. Now, again, I'm not criticizing anybody for partaking in any of these things if you enjoy them, but they're not going to lead to lasting peace and happiness. They can't. Again, those are pleasurable things, but they are not things that lead to a lasting sense of peace and happiness. They just can't. So before awakening, this tends to be what we equate with happiness, is pleasure. Things that we like, things that give us pleasure. Again, in my experience, pleasure, bliss, true joy, true happiness, these are very different things. They have a very different quality to them. The ego and the sort of standard narrative that most of us live by in our culture is to try and maximize pleasure, and that maximizing pleasure will lead to happiness. So things like exotic vacations, again, lavish meals, luxury lifestyle. These are things that when I'm on social media, I see these are things that many people are kind of flaunting and putting out there as though, you know, this is what life is about. This is what's important in life. And again, nothing wrong with any of those things, but in my experience, again, they don't actually lead to happiness. So when we wake up, we have this other experience of this sort of underlying current of peace and happiness that we get the sense that it's always there. It doesn't come and go, but our awareness of it can come and go in time. Now, if we've had a powerful awakening, then we might experience long stretches where we feel that connection. My own experience tends to be that the stretches seem to get longer and longer, and they become more just a sort of normal part of your experience. You might even forget that that's what you're experiencing, except maybe you just find yourself a lot more grateful, joyful, happy, content than your contemporaries. But when you experience the dark night, I think that you really get that contrast of, you know, being cut off from that, and the viewpoint is completely different as a result. And again, it's very, very painful. So these are the two ideas I wanted to share with you today. So the first one is that when we know better, when we know that the way we're seeing a situation is not really the reality of the way things are, but we're having a really hard time seeing it otherwise. And again, this is usually due to what one of my teachers calls Velcro thoughts. Scott Killaby, he calls them Velcro thoughts. I like that. So we have certain thoughts or emotions that are like Velcro, and we get sucked back into this egoic perspective and all the pain that comes with that perspective. And then the other part of it is that stark contrast of having experienced lasting peace, joy, and bliss, and now having it taken away from us. So this is why it might seem strange that somebody who talks about lasting peace, joy, bliss, the end of suffering, and then they seem to go into this just horrific experience of deep, deep suffering. You might be thinking, well, they they can't know what they're talking about. Look at them, they're a mess. But this is why, this is what's going on. Now, as I've said before, I don't really believe in such a thing as pointless suffering. And if we're suffering, it is ultimately for our benefit and for the benefit of all, because that's really the same thing. And so we need to go through these periods with grace and faith and trust that what will be revealed through the experience will be of value. And that's certainly been the experience for me. As most of you know, the last year or so, pretty much all of 2023, especially the second half of that year, I was experiencing a dark night of the soul. It got very, very intense, very bleak. And at least for now, it seems to have led up. I've had a lot of insight arise as I've that sort of lifted, and I've been trying to share that with you, and I will continue to do so. But this is one of the insights that I wanted to share with you. And again, my intention is for it to be of value to you. So if you are someone who's experienced an awakening and you're going through a dark night of the soul and you're like, what is wrong with me? What happened? Why is this so dark? Why am I suffering so much? How can I be suffering so much? I know better. You know, I thought I was beyond this, all this kind of stuff. Well, this talk is for you. You're not alone. And again, I think it was St. Thomas Aquinas maybe, or it could have been St. Augustine. I don't remember who coined that phrase, dark night of the soul, where they felt like their connection with God, you know, they lost that connection. They felt like they had been abandoned. I think this is also probably illustrated with Jesus's, you know, when he is in the on the cross and before the crucifixion, when he's in the park. I don't remember the name of it now. And you know, he feels abandoned by God, and he feels unsure about God's plan. And then he says, not my will, but thy will. And he sort of remembers. He remembers himself. He remembers the big picture. And I think this is useful for us as well when we're experiencing that, when we feel abandoned. I know it certainly helped me. Now, I don't want to gloss over the pain and suffering that happens. I know for me it was very, very intense, and I have a lot of tools at my disposal that helped get me through that period. I don't know how I would have fared without them, to be honest with you. So I'm very grateful that I've had the training that I've had, and I've had the experiences that I've had that allowed me to navigate that dark night of mine, and hopefully I'm out of it. It's hard to say for sure. Anyway, everybody, I hope that this will be of value to you. Again, if you can, please like, subscribe, share, comment, and if you'd like to become a Patreon or make a donation, please check out the links below. Until next time, everyone, namaste, and have a beautiful